Hey everyone, I've received a lot of questions about the visual analysis activity that is coming up, and so I wanted to create a video going through the systematic visual analysis. Now, I want to let you know that I've made this video about 3 times, and I keep getting text messages that pop up that I really didn't want to share, so I keep redoing it, and it's that point in the night where I'm just getting exhausted. So if I'm not making sense, it's a me thing, not a you thing. Just go ahead and shoot me an email and let me know if you need clarification. I know that a lot of you are really worried about this assignment. Again, like I said, I've received a lot of emails, and I understand your anxiety. This is something that's new for many of you, and this is a first attempt at visually analyzing data, right? In other classes, you've looked at data, but you've not really been critical about it. And you might have graphed something, but you really just did a surface level visual analysis. And so this is the first assignment where you're really delving deep into it, and I think some of the terminology is tricky. The first thing that I want to point out is that in the Ledford and Gast book, Chapter 8 goes over visual analysis of graphic data, and this systematic visual analysis is the process that's outlined by the authors, Barton and colleagues, to conduct a systematic visual analysis and determine if there's a functional relationship. So I'll go through each of these steps and give you some hints about things that you want to look out for. And again, just let me know if something isn't clear and I can go ahead and meet with you, or we can talk a little bit more about it via email. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to review the graphs for equal and appropriate scaling of axes, and to identify the data series, conditions, representation of time, unit of analysis, so like the participant, the behavior, the context, and you're going to explain your findings. So all I want you to do is look at the 4 graphs and determine if the y-axis scale is appropriate. So for example, if your unit of measurement is percentage of intervals, then the y-max should be 100 because there's 100 percentage points in a percentage. Whereas if the unit of analysis, if the outcome variable, is something else, maybe like frequency, you would just want to make sure that the scaling is the same across participants so that you can compare each of the participants' graphs. You'll also want to look at the conditions, so are they labeled and were there adequate replications? Look at the representation of time, so is it an appropriate unit of measurement on the x-axis? And then you look at the unit of analysis. What are we looking at? Are we looking at individual participants? Are we looking at one participant with multiple behaviors or multiple contexts? And you just want to provide a summary statement here about whether or not all of these things are adequate. A few of you have submitted graphs where you did not have the y-axis scaling correct, and this is going to influence your data analysis. So you have 2 options. You can correct it, as I had suggested based on the feedback that I provided, or you can go ahead and explain in your visual analysis why your visual analysis is going to be off. Personally, I think that it's easier to go ahead and correct it, and it's going to give you you're going to be able to do a better job going through the visual analysis because I know what to expect. The next thing is that you are going to examine the research questions for the predicted patterns of change in the dependent variables and explain your findings. The initial scenario of the graphing assignment, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you're using the data that you graphed for the for the learning activity related to graphing. But in that data set, there's a paragraph that talks about the referral concern and what the consultant was hoping to evaluate. So you might find it helpful to write yourself out the research question. Remember that a good research question includes the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the participants. And given that research question, what would you expect would happen if you continued your baseline data? What's your prediction? And then what would happen if you implemented the intervention? So you might find it helpful to review the parts of the text about research questions. You're going to have to form a hypothesis of what you would expect to happen, and then you're going to explain your findings. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to review the number of data points per condition. So You also want to evaluate data stability within the condition and determine if there's an adequate amount of data to establish a predictable pattern in each condition. So remember that a lot of the newer conventions suggest that we need to have a minimum of 5 data points per phase in order to determine a functional relationship. Older single case research design said that 3 data points was the minimum to establish trend, but we wanted more if possible. So you're going to look at the number of data points and see if there's enough for you to analyze. Now you have to take into consideration that this is an applied research question, and so sometimes you might not always be able to collect all the data that you want. And so in cases where maybe there are 2 data points or 3 data points, you can decide to continue with your visual analysis, but you're going to have to um, couch that participant's data and explain why you, or like provide a rationale for why you continued with that visual analysis. And that might be as simple as it's an applied setting and the person was unavailable. We had an adequate number of data points in all of the other phases and decided to move forward. So number one and number two, you're looking at all 4 data sets together. And in number 3, there might be ones where you can proceed to step 4 and others where you can't. So say that there's too few data points or there's too much variability, you're going to look at number 3A, B, and C and decide what to do. So if you have an adequate number of data points, you simply proceed to step 4. If you decide to move on with the visual analysis, even though there might not be data stability or there's not enough data points, talk about it. So if you go to B, if it's due to high variability in the baseline condition that you think will stabilize once you introduce the independent variable, then keep on going with your visual analysis. But if you cannot go on because the variability precludes identifying a predictable pattern of behavior within more than one condition, or precludes the evaluation of the behavior change across adjacent conditions, then you're going to discontinue visual analysis and you'll explain why experimental control cannot be established. The next step is to look at the level, trend, and variability of data in each condition. So for the participants that you can go on with, talk about levels. So this is how high or how low the mean data is. Trend, you've learned to identify an increasing trend, a decreasing trend, or no trend. And the variability or stability. So remember that variability is the bounce in the data, the up and down. And once intervention is implemented, you really want to see improved behaviors, so a change in the level. You can see a trend in the direction that is therapeutic, and you want to see more stability over time. So if you feel that there are clear data patterns within all conditions, so within the baseline phases you have consistency and the intervention phases you have consistency, then you're going to talk about the level change and the stability, and talk about the trend direction and stability, and then talk about the amount of variability in each condition for each of the participants. And this doesn't have to be long. You can write your response right under these headings and just provide a few sentences. If you cannot do this, right, if there aren't clear data patterns and your data are just all over the place, then you're going to discontinue the visual analysis and explain why you cannot demonstrate experimental control. So if you were able to move on, and I'm going to tell you that you should be able to move on with at least some of the participants, you should be able to get to the end. You're going to look at and analyze the level, trend, variability, and stability of adjacent conditions. So this is the A to the B to the A to the B. I feel like I'm rapping there. And you're going to look at whether or not there was a change in the conditions right next to each other. This allows you to determine a basic effect, And you're going to look at the magnitude of change. So, was there an immediate change of high magnitude? Look at changes in direction of trend, right? So, maybe during baseline, there was trend in a countertherapeutic direction with more variability. Whereas once you implemented intervention, there was an immediate change of high magnitude with an increasing trend in a therapeutic direction. And you're simply going to walk through what's going on. So, you just look at your data and talk about it in terms of level, trend, and variability. I would say that you should go into a little bit more detail than you did in the extra credit assignment. So then you're going to look at whether or not behavior change occurred across adjacent conditions, and if it does, you're going to go to step 6. And if there wasn't a change, then you're going to talk about why you can't demonstrate experimental control. This all goes back to baseline logic with your prediction, verification, affirmation, and replication. If it's yes, you're going to decide if you're going to look at the consistency of behavior change across conditions. So this is in the intervention conditions and the baseline conditions. And if you decide that the changes are consistent with the predicted pattern, so if we see a therapeutic change in behavior when the intervention is implemented during all times and it's replicated, then you're going to talk about the consistency and talk about the predicted patterns. If if you can do this, then also look at the magnitude of change across conditions and talk about your findings. What do you see? If you cannot and there's no change at all, then discontinue your visual analysis, explain why you cannot demonstrate experimental control. So after you've gotten through all of this and you've looked at your graphs to make sure that they are constructed appropriately, you've looked at whether or not you can predict changes based on the research question, and you've looked at and analyzed adjacent conditions, so the ones that are right next to each other and the change that occurred, and then you also look at similar conditions, so comparing the baselines to each other and then the intervention to each other. You're going to look at what data you have left, what you can analyze, and you're going to then make a summative conclusion regarding the experimental control and functional relationship to answer your research questions. So this might be for participant 1, the intervention was functionally related um, to the behavior change, right? So the intervention caused a change in the behavior. And you look at this by determining if there was a basic effect in adjacent conditions, whether there was a immediate change of high magnitude, a change in the level, the trend, the variability, etc. And then you're going to look at all of the data put together and then consider each of the participants. The other thing that you're going to do is you're going to calculate the mean, median, and range across each condition for each participant, and you can create a table to summarize these data. So for participant 1, you're going to calculate the mean for baseline 1, for the intervention, for the withdrawal, and then for the intervention. So each phase will have a separate mean, each phase will have a separate median, and then each phase will have a separate range. And then you're going to just summarize these in a data table. This assignment is tricky. It's something that's new to you, but I'm confident that you can do it. This is a first exposure, and you're going to need to practice the skill many, 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 many times. This is something that I still find myself having to practice. And remember that a lot of times experts in the field of behavior analysis who have lots of single case research design experience still disagree somewhat on the visual analysis. And so just practice it, talk through it with me if you have questions, and know that I am here to support you and that I understand that this is a new skill that y'all are developing. I hope this helps to clarify and to calm you down a little bit. If not, let me know and we can talk through it more. Have a super night.